Picture this. It's the weekend in Baton Rouge, and the city is buzzing with excitement. LSU and Southern University sports have just scored big wins, and the celebrations are in full swing. But amidst the revelry, there's a sobering reality lurking beneath the surface. A fear that hangs heavy in the air. A fear of becoming the next victim to senseless violence. In a city where going out should be a joyous occasion, many find themselves hesitating, opting to stay home or venture to neighboring parishes instead. This is the stark truth of life in the capital city, where the line between celebration and caution blurs with each passing day. In this episode of Louisiana Unfiltered, we take a closer look at the chilling statistics of crime in Baton Rouge, as told by those who bear witness to its grim aftermath. We sit down with Dr. Beau, the East Baton Rouge Parish Coroner, who sheds light on the daunting task of navigating the rising tide of homicides and overdoses plaguing our streets. We also sit down with the coroner's chief criminal investigator, Shane Evans, who brings decades of law enforcement experience, to talk about where can we start to even get a handle on crime in the capital city. Can city leaders shift the tide and public perspective that Baton Rouge is actually safe? This is Louisiana Unfiltered. Welcome back, everybody. We are joined by the East Baton Rouge Parish Coroner, Dr. Beau Clark, and his Chief of Investigations, Shane Evans. I want to start with the first question, which maybe people don't realize. Yes, they may connect the dots that a coroner works a death, but what is the role of a coroner?
So let's put it in broad perspective, and then we'll bring it down. So in the state of Louisiana, every parish has a coroner, just like they have a sheriff or a clerk of court, and those levels of government. The coroner is charged with 3 jurisdictions. The one we're most notable for, obviously, is the investigation of death. And I think it gets confusing a lot of times because people think, well, you just go pick up a body. But it's really way more than that. We're actually investigating why someone dies. But even more specifically than that, we're investigating if the result of their death is from a crime. So really our role, if you think about it, is to be involved in the unnatural side of death. And when we talk about unnatural side of death, we're talking about homicides, we're talking about accidents, we're talking about suicides, and we're talking about sometimes even undetermined manners of death. Certainly we get involved in a lot of natural death investigation because we're ruling out whether it was unnatural or natural. So yes, we do still investigate the natural side of death, and actually still do it quite a bit, as a matter of fact. It's the other side, the unnatural side, that really consumes a lot of our time and energy and effort, especially when you see numbers of unnatural deaths begin to rise. And so because of that, that's where you see the strain on the office. And so in addition to that, we have 2 other jurisdictions most people don't know about. One has to do with the involuntary committal of the mentally ill. And then the last one is the collection of forensic evidence in sexual assault. So we actually do the rape kit. And so if you look at numbers, we're the largest parish, East Baton Rouge Parish, almost 500,000 people, largest parish in the state of Louisiana. The work of the coroner is always going to be proportional to the size of the parish. So we're one of the busiest, if not the busiest offices, coroner's offices in the state of Louisiana. We do about 4,500 death investigations a year. We do about 10,000 mental health cases a year. And then we also do probably about 400, 500 sexual assault cases. So sexual assault being our smallest jurisdiction, death being our most known jurisdiction, but mental health really being our largest jurisdiction.
Where does East Baton Rouge Coroner's Office compare to Orleans?
So Orleans tends to, statistically, and they don't do, I've never studied much of if they do an annual report or not or what their numbers look like, but just as a gestalt, they mostly deal in a lot more unnatural deaths. They have higher numbers of homicides than we do, which is interesting because that's disproportionate to the size of their population. you'll recall after Katrina, Orleans Parish used to be a large parish, and then a lot of people left Orleans Parish after Katrina. A lot of them ended up here in Baton Rouge and elsewhere, some out of state. And that's why you see a lot of the problems that exist in Baton Rouge today has to do, and it's not just from what I do as the coroner. I mean, traffic is a perfect example. It has to do with a city that used to be able to control about 230, 250,000 people. Boom, the next day it's 500,000.
Yep.
And so then what comes with a population increase like that? Not only traffic, but all the other problems that we have, right? Including what I see as unnatural death.
So is East Baton Rouge's population bigger than Orleans right now?
Yes, it is. It has been for some time.
And a lot of our listeners are from other even countries. So New Orleans is what everybody knows. Oh, it's Mardi Gras. It's Mardi Gras.
Sure.
Baton Rouge is obviously the capital of Louisiana. It's about 90 miles west of New Orleans.
Yes.
But we're now saying that the population in East Baton Rouge is even bigger than New Orleans.
Yeah, so our last census number, I think, was 450,000 people. The closest parish in population to us is Jefferson Parish. They're at 430,000. So Orleans ranks, I think, third, and then you follow Shreveport, Caddo Parish after that. And then it precipitously drops off where you have parishes out there that have very, very few people in them.
Interesting. I guess one last question I want to ask of setup is that give us your background into,
Sure.
I know you're a doctor and then Shane is former law enforcement.
Yeah, so my career, I did my undergraduate, got my Bachelor of Science at Louisiana Tech University. Then I attended medical school at LSU School of Medicine in New Orleans, came back to Baton Rouge, did my residency at Earl K. Long in emergency medicine, and I'm board certified in emergency medicine. And that was my career for a long time. Concurrently with that, during my residency, I decided I wanted to volunteer back to the community, so I joined the Sheriff's Office, East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office. Was the physician for the SWAT team for almost a decade. That's where I met Shane. So that's kind of my law enforcement background that was operating concurrently with practicing medicine. And then in 2011, I was asked to run for coroner by a lot of law enforcement people in the Baton Rouge area. And I did, and I've been the coroner since. And it's really interesting because, if you really think about what the coroner does, they're a doctor, that's a cop, right? That's exactly what I am. And I didn't recognize that at the beginning, but of course, now that I know both jobs, then I can later look back on that and say how this matches what I know and know how to do.
It's safe to say Shane's kind of your right-hand man?
Yeah, so, as far as chief of investigation goes, it's absolutely safe to say that because that's what we do. We investigate things, And so Shane has been with me since the beginning, since I was first elected. And what are we investigating? Well, everything we do is investigation. And so I really felt when I hired him, and I knew him well, obviously, that he brought the tools to the table to really take the coroner's office to another level. And I feel like we've done that in East Baton Rouge Parish. We really created a kind of a gold standard of how things should operate. It's not, and I always tell people this, it's not that we're better than anybody else. We just have a lot more practice doing things. So,
Shane, give us your background.
Well, I went into law enforcement in 1990 for East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office, and within a year or so, I was in narcotics. I worked narcotics in Baton Rouge during most of the 90s. Became a SWAT team member, and as my career progressed through the sheriff's office, wound up in special operations as a firearms instructor and SWAT team commander, and that's where Dr. Clark and I met. He was a reserve. He showed up as a volunteer. He brought his own weapons, his own equipment, and he outshot half the guys on the team. Right, he was a very high level member of the team, and we included him in everything we did. I've even been injured on a call out, and he stitched my face up. Right, so it was certainly comforting as a law enforcement officer in those type of operations, high risk warrants and things like that, to have somebody there. I mean, he has this gigantic black backpack that's basically an emergency room in a duffel, so he could tend to people's emergencies. Fortunately, we were very, very proficient, and we didn't get hurt very often, nor did we ever hurt anybody on those calls. So that's how he earned my trust, right? Because when I first saw him, I have to use that anecdote. He looked like Doogie Howser. I'm like, who is that dude? He looks like he's 16 years old, right? We're talking about, 2004, 2005. He's still very, very young looking for his age, but he really looked young then. And then somebody said, well, he's been like an emergency room doctor for 12 or 15 years at that point. So, he earned everybody's respect very quickly because he showed up for trainings. He showed up for all the missions that we had. And then I went to the Inspector General's office and was there on a public corruption task force for a few years, which is, I laugh about it now. In Louisiana, that's shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, it's really not even fair, right? Because it's in state government, those are easy things to identify, especially when you bring a skill set as a narcotics agent willing to go out and do surveillances. They're not used to that. They're not used to being watched. So as time went by, one of the complaints that popped up was about a broken relationship with the coroner's office in East Baton Rouge Parish and law enforcement. There was some friction there. So law enforcement leaders, including myself, went and met with Dr. Clark at Brewbacher's on Bluebonnet Boulevard back in 2011, the fall, and told him that East Baton Rouge Parish deserves a coroner not only they can trust, but develops a real high-level working relationship with justice, with the district attorney and with law enforcement. And Dr. Clark agreed to run, and he won that fall and unseated an incumbent.
And you've been there 12 years now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
we're starting the 13th year now, so we got a whole nother 4 to go.
Yep.
That's awesome. Yeah. Congratulations
Thank
on
you.
that.
Thank
That
you.
alone is saying something about you.
Thanks.
One important thing I want to stress is that your office plays a vital role in providing information to law enforcement, be the Baton Rouge Police Department here, Baker, Zachary, Central, whatnot, and the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office, for them to be able to kind of rely on you for the cause of death, manner of death, that kind of thing. But then also you deal hand in hand with the district attorney's office when it comes to prosecuting a case.
Yeah, and that's a very important note because I like to always, when people say that and they wrap their mind around that, but you also have to remember when I testify, and I do a lot of my own testimony in this parish, in East Baton Rouge Parish, when I do that testimony, I'm not there for the prosecution or for the defense. I'm there to provide scientific facts that were discovered through our investigation. So sometimes it can be you're working for the district attorney's office to help them prosecute the case. No, I'm there. I'm going to present the facts. As a matter of fact, over the 12 years of testimony, there's a question that I never can answer. And the question is do you know who, murdered this person? I have no idea. No, it's not my jurisdiction. My jurisdiction is to determine how they died, the circumstances surrounding that, and that's it. And so it really makes it a scenario where it's not for the prosecution and it's not for the defense. But it's very crucial in the criminal justice system.
And it's important for all agencies to get along, though.
Yep, absolutely.
I want to be able to kind of take our viewer through what it means to be a coroner. So one thing that we as reporters rely on from you guys is the cause of death and the manner of death.
Yes.
Explain to us, what is that? What does that mean?
So there are 5 manners of death: natural, homicide, suicide, accidental, and undetermined. And then, of course, the cause of death will correlate with that. So if I say somebody dies of pancreatic cancer, that's a natural death. If I say they die of a gunshot wound, that could be a homicide or a suicide. If I say it's an overdose or a motor vehicle collision, that's an accidental death. And so that's how it works. But what's important to note about that, because that seems pretty simplistic, is remember that when we're defining those terms, cause and manner of death, we're doing it on the front end before anything has been adjudicated, okay? And so because I call it a homicide doesn't necessarily mean it ends up in a murder charge, okay? It's what we found out at the very beginning. Now, it might be adjudicated, go through the system, and be determined that it was justifiable. Okay, those are legal terms. Those are not coroner terms. Those are not medical legal terms.
Yes.
And so that becomes very important for people to understand is that we make those determinations on the front end, and that's what carries us through the system. So oftentimes you will hear different homicide numbers, right? And this is a common example. The media will say, well, the police department is reporting that there are so many homicides. And then it'd be like the sheriff's department is reporting there's so many homicides. And then my number will be much different, which could be a combination of those two numbers. It could be even a higher number because there are certain ones that they, based on FBI criteria, they rule in or out of their statistics. If you want the solid raw number of people that died in the parish as a result of someone else, which is the true medical legal definition of a homicide, you go to my number. If you want to see what has happened through the adjudication process, then you can use those other entities.
And for our listeners, and Shane, please step in to add to what I'm saying, but a justifiable homicide basically means that you were justified to shoot, so maybe a self-defense or something like that, and those justifiable numbers is something the law enforcement does not use in their final count for homicides.
That's correct. And in Louisiana law we're fortunate we've got a pretty clear justifiable homicide law, right? And so if a person has a reasonable and articulable belief that they're about to be gravely injured or killed, then they can use force to defend themselves. So, for example, I'll put that in, let's say a state trooper does a traffic stop and somebody gets out with a shotgun and points a shotgun at the trooper and the trooper shoots that person. We're going to call that a homicide because that is a medical legal term. Louisiana, they have murder, right? First and second degree murder charges. So they may, the district attorney or the AG, whoever's investigating that, may decide that, hey, we're not going to prosecute this as a second or first degree murder because it doesn't meet the criteria and it's justifiable. But it remains a homicide with us because that says a person dies due to the specific intent of another to kill them. So all those justifiable things don't come into our realm. And I think it's one of the things that's so important to us. And look, I'm the first one to hold my hand up and say I can be difficult at times. But it's because we have to be independent and we're not even beholden to what the family wants us to say it is or law enforcement. And, I knew coming in that I need to make it easier on law enforcement to access evidence. That was one of our goals, is to make sure that they had the tools they need, and we work with them on schedules so they could be present at autopsies and collect whatever forensic evidence that they need. But they don't tell us what the cause and manner is. Coroner's office tells them what the cause and manner is. And we have to be truly independent because our truth belongs to that victim, period. Yep. Because you have families that try to steer you a certain way. An accidental overdose, this is one of those things we got where, they just got out of rehab. Somebody did this to them. But the evidence at the scene and certainly that blood toxicology tells us a different story.
And half the battle that you guys are facing is overdose deaths are significantly higher compared to years past.
So if you put it in a nutshell, you go back to 2012, I think we had 28 overdoses that year. And then we see somewhere around 2015, 2016, a conversion from heroin to fentanyl. That caused a bump. We got into triple digits. And then really over the last 3 years, we've lived in a realm of about 300. I know, we went from 294 to 289 over the last 2 years. And that's all outlined in the annual report if you needed, to look at it through diagram. But the point is that 6 less deaths, which is significant. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that at all. The fewer people that die is always significant. My concern, though, if you look at 3 years worth of data, is it statistically significant? Meaning, are we starting to see a downslope? Are we going to move back to low triple digits? Are we going to move back to double digits, maybe even zero? And only time will really tell. But at the same time, you can look at that and say, we've already done 45 overdoses this year. So, it's not a good start. We're moving in the high number direction again.
Well, and what was it, 21? I know for homicides, as far as like gunshots and that kind of thing, homicides in 2021 was the highest East Baton Rouge Parish has ever seen.
73 or something like that.
What about overdoses?
Well, for the past 4 or 5 years, we're about double on overdoses and homicides.
Right? Do you have the highest year yet, or is it every year
it's been
increasing?
It was 311 overdoses, and hold on, get the number. I got it right here. What year that was? I think it was 2 years ago, 22.
And the coroner just released his annual report, which we covered that in a news conference. So that's what he's looking through right now. If you hear the ruffling of the feathers,
and while he's looking that up, it's as Dr. Clark talks about, we're hoping for that downward slope of overdoses. And having spent 12 years of my career in narcotics and 8 of that as the commander, I've been to DEA's commander academies in Quantico. I don't think we're going to see a substantial change until we see a change at the border. Take politics aside, all right? And so this is a question I often ask. What would the federal government do about that southern border if every year someone smuggled in a bomb and killed 110,000 people in a football stadium, right? That border would be locked up tight. Well, fentanyl that came across that southern border in 2022 killed 115,000 Americans. And until the backpacks stop coming across there, because if they can carry a kilo of fentanyl across, then they've got seed money to start a life here, right? And so if they're not being searched and interdicted, then those drugs are going to continue coming. And it is so powerfully addictive. I've seen reports of what someone has to go through to detox and withdraw from fentanyl, and they think they're dying.
I know we've covered so many stories. Unfortunately, we as an Unfiltered with Kiran have covered stories of moms or dads reaching out that their child died from fentanyl. So we've covered the victim impact story, the survivors' stories. We've also covered the numbers. But what is fentanyl? So
fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, and it's very important to understand because everything is a derivative of morphine. That's where it all starts. Okay, so you got the parent compound morphine, and then there's several opioids that branch out from that. Certainly, there's a whole pharmaceutical community of opioids, that are dangerous. But usually, you're getting those through the prescription of a healthcare provider that's monitoring you. Also, those pharmaceuticals do go through a quality assurance method and process, so you can assure that every one you take has the appropriate number of milligrams in it, based on the label. When you move into the illicit market, though, it changes. There's no potency testing. So you don't know if you're getting really potent heroin or fentanyl or whatever it is, or not very potent. And so that creates a problem in and of itself. With the difference between heroin and fentanyl, though, heroin, you need Mother Nature. You have to have soil to grow the plant. You need sunlight. You need rain. You switch to a fentanyl, a synthetic, it's just made in a laboratory. You can make it 24 hours a day. It doesn't matter whether the sun's shining. And so that's what you're seeing, is that there's a conversion from having to grow a plant to creating something in a lab. And even though the popular show on television, Breaking Bad, was about methamphetamine, it's the same phenomena. You just make this in a laboratory. Now, all of a sudden, you're using the same distribution model with a drug that's easily made that also doesn't need as much quantity to cause the same effects. So if you're talking about carrying a package of heroin that has a certain amount of heroin in it, now you can carry the same package of fentanyl that's more powerful than the package of heroin, so you're getting more into our community. And, really this is all about making money. This is all economics. Drug dealers don't care whether you live or die. They simply want to give you this drug and get you hooked on it, and you buy more and more and more of it until you die. And then all of a sudden, guess what? They just move on to the next person. There is no way of knowing how many people in the United States of America have the potential to be addicted. There's no way. You can't look at people. You don't know who's going to be addicted or not. I tell this story oftentimes when I talk about the opioid epidemic. You've heard of people that say, my physician gave me an opioid because I had surgery, and I took it, and I didn't like the way it made me feel. I felt nauseated. I just slept. I didn't take any more of it. That's an individual that's likely not going to become addicted to opioids. Conversely with that, you have another person that says, I took it, and I loved it, and I wanted more. And when I ran out, I went back to the physician to try to get more. And when that couldn't happen, then I turned to the street. Now you've got a problem. The point is that you can't look at those two individuals and know which one's which. So me, even as a practicing physician, when I look at the people sitting in an emergency room waiting area, I don't know which ones that I could potentially accidentally get addicted on that by just simply writing a prescription that they're going to fall in love with. And so that's scary. And so you look at, trends of addiction. I mean, how many is it? Is it 50% of America? Is it 70% of America? Who knows? But if we keep flooding the border and the poison essentially into the system, then it has the potential to addict all those who are able to be addicted.
And we can talk about non-user impact, right? When we were having about 100 to 120 deaths a year from overdoses, because we don't get hospital numbers of people who survive. Right?
Exactly.
I don't know how many people
survived
law enforcement or
overdose.
EMS or
Yes.
the hospital say. But during that year, I kind of tried to reach out, and at that time I heard on the order of 600 that the hospital saw for our 100 deaths. So in my mind, I've always used a times 6 model. So if we're at 300, then they could be
1,800.
Right. So how that affects the person who doesn't walk in that world is you seriously could be in a waiting room, in an emergency room, or in a hallway waiting for urgent care of some sort or another, and slowed in that process because they're busy down the hall trying to save somebody from an overdose of a drug that was smuggled across our southern border, right? And so we won't spend a lot of your time on it unless you want to, but the reason why that's happening is because Mexican ports do not restrict those precursor chemicals like we do here, right? You can't bring those chemicals into LA or San Francisco ports because they're identified as chemical precursors. Those restrictions don't exist in Mexico. So the labs are there, the cartels are running those, they produce it down into a product which is then smuggled. So it's interesting because cocaine and heroin is extraordinarily rare now. We very seldom see that in blood toxicology. It's methamphetamine and fentanyl, and like Dr. Clark explained, it's because those things could be made in a lab without worry of a drought or floods or a plant having to grow.
Talk to me about the dose of fentanyl. We've discussed this in length. We had a little boy who died. He went to the hospital multiple times, and you explained to me the dosage, and I can't remember the exact number right this second, but you explained to me that the dosage for a child or an adult at so-and-so level is something you can recover from with Narcan, but in that child's case, I think he was well over, or in Nathan Millard's cases, that just a small bit of fentanyl is deadly.
Yeah, so it's not on the front end of the dose because it's difficult when you're talking about illicit drugs and talking about dosage because you really don't know, right?
Exactly.
So you got to look on the back end. And so when we look at the toxicology reports and we look at how much fentanyl exists in the system post-mortemly, obviously they died as a result of it because we've discovered that.
And let me interject real quick for the viewers. What he's talking about is like the blood toxicology levels
Correct.
that you guys run after somebody dies.
Yeah, so when somebody dies, and I'll hopefully can come back around to this because you're talking about the impact to people who might say they're not affected by the opioid epidemic, and I'll explain. There's multiple reasons and ways all of us are affected, even if you're not having an addiction issue or have any addiction issues in your immediate circle of people. But nonetheless, when we spend a lot of energy and effort investigating deaths, and if there's just a slight possibility this could be related to drugs, the slight possibility, family history from the family that says that, well, in the past they have abused drugs, anything. And then, of course, all the way up to paraphernalia, needle, spoon, syringe, things like we find on the scene. We will do drug toxicology to the tune of about $450, $480, $500 per case, and that will tell us what's in their system. A lot of times we rule in, meaning a lot of times, guess what? We find it. We find it right there. We find the fentanyl. We find the methamphetamine or any of the other drugs. We find these synthetic things that are starting to come out, these really weird, specialized it's more than just fentanyl. It's, supercharged stuff. Xylazine, I think you've reported on xylazine before, which is an elephant tranquilizer for the audience. I mean, and it baffles me why you would take a drug as powerful as fentanyl and add something like an elephant tranquilizer. I mean, I don't know what you're trying to do at that point. Other than cause death and destruction. But nonetheless, we look at that and then we find it. And what's interesting is the case where there's the needle and the spoon and the drug history, and we're at a typical drug a hotel where we pick up lots of drug overdoses, that we know they're going to rule in, right? But it's the unusual ones where you're like, we have a gestalt, a feeling, maybe we should check it, and we find it. And then, boom, that's just another number that goes into that statistical category that causes us to go from, 120 to 300 scenario. So, but to round back, you think, well, I don't have any addiction. I don't have, in my circle, there's not addiction. How am I impacted by that? What about the economics of it? My office is run by taxpayer dollars. We're running a $500 toxicology test because we're in the midst of an opiate epidemic on a lot of people. I think I was looking. I think we did 1,000 toxicology kits last year. So I mean, do the quick numbers on that. It's $500,000 just in running tox, and so
it's our largest expense.
It is So if you feel like it's not impacting you and you're a taxpayer, it is impacting you. You're paying for it.
And this doesn't apply just to East Baton Rouge Parish. This applies to every jurisdiction in the United States and probably outside of this country as well.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean,
Canada, Alaska,
yes,
the Keys, Hawaii, all of it.
I want to go back to the question I asked, though. Explain the fentanyl dosage. I know you've explained that in the past, that, hey, if we see this much amount, but then I know the examples that are coming to my mind are the little baby and the Nathan Millard case where the levels were just crazy high.
Right. And in this format, it's a little harder to explain it, but I'll do it like this, right? So a gram of heroin is the size of a sugar packet you get at a gas station to pour in your coffee. That's a gram, right? So 5 or 6 grains of that sugar and fentanyl can kill you.
Wow.
Right? So it is as much as think on the order of 1/16 would certainly be very, very dangerous of that amount of heroin. It is. So for a person who is coming to the United States across the border carrying a backpack with some drugs in it. So let's say he would have to have 20 pill bottles full of heroin to equal the same drug impact as 1 pill bottle full of fentanyl. So if you're a drug mule, what would you prefer to carry? Right?
Fentanyl. 1
pill bottle of fentanyl or 20 pill bottles of heroin, because it's going to have the same impact on the streets here in the States. So it's, and again, like Dr. Clark said, every lab's different. They're not controlled by any government agency to give us the potency. But the biggest problem of all is the dealers are selling. If you ask for anything, if somebody goes out and says, I want some cocaine or I want some methamphetamine, you're getting fentanyl.
It's laced with fentanyl.
It's always adulterated because it's much easier to walk away from methamphetamine, cocaine, even marijuana if it's not laced with fentanyl, right? Because we've had some deaths now where the family history that they provided for that user was like he only smoked marijuana. He never did any powder or anything of that, and we have a fentanyl overdose. So somebody has sprayed his marijuana
with
in an effort to create an addicted customer, and it resulted in his death because he didn't expect it. He had no tolerance. He'd never used it before, right? So a very, very small amount. So the drug toxicology panels that we use, if somebody comes back like at a 1 to 3 nanograms per milliliter, that can kill them if they're a naive user. If somebody's been using fentanyl for some time, they could have a 12 or 15 and walk around, drive a car, because they developed a tolerance. And I guess for the users, the listeners, you may have a freshman college co-ed who's never used marijuana before, and she smokes some marijuana and it just like wipes her out. But Willie Nelson uses the same amount, doesn't even affect him, right? Because he's got a tolerance. And it's the same thing applies with, same thing with fentanyl, right? If somebody's used to using it, they have a chance, but there is still a terrible withdrawal in front of them when they choose to quit.
Yeah, so what you're talking, I mean, ultimately what we're talking about is the pharmacological condition called tolerance. Tolerance is it exists across all toxicology, but it's very specific when you talk about opioids. And you've seen tolerance before, you just didn't realize you might not have realized you've seen it. It's when somebody says, I took the pain pill the doctor gave me, and it worked for a few days, then it stopped working. So I called, and they said take 2 of them. So I took 2 of them, and that worked for a few days, then it stopped working. So I called again, and they wrote me for a higher potency, a higher dose of the pain pill, right? That's tolerance. What happens is that the opioids bind to the receptors in your brain. They're called mu receptors. They eventually just get numb to the opioid. It's like the opioid's touching that receptor too much, and when that happens, then it just needs more to get the same effect. Now, on the street, they call this chasing the dragon, right? It's the first high that someone ever had. It was the greatest high they've ever had, and they spend the rest of their life, and I really mean the rest of their life because they never catch it again, chasing the dragon, chasing that high. What they catch is death, okay? They never catch the dragon again. So they spend their life trying to get back to that point, and they never do. And they spend their life taking more or more powerful or lumping things together, and that's what leads to their death.
And you're seeing more overdoses.
Mm-hmm.
What is your number this year so far on overdoses, and compare that to the highest year of overdoses?
So we've had 45 overdoses to date this year. We have some cases that are pending, and that's important for people to understand. And I'll just take a sidetrack real quick. I always tell people toxicology takes longer than commercial break, right? You watch a Netflix show, it looks like, they go to commercial break and then toxicology is done. It's not that way. And because of the opioid epidemic, we used to have turnaround times on toxicology from our laboratory about 21 days, okay? Now it's extending out to several months because guess what? They're testing a lot of samples from around the country. So it's just more volume for them, and they're constantly adding machines and technicians, but they're really not keeping up with it because of the sheer volume. So having said that, is when we say we have 45 cases, those are 45 that we've actually finished, determined, that's the number. And then beyond that, there are certain cases that are kind of in, that the person has died. We think it's an overdose, or we're waiting on the toxicology. Now, a few of those may rule out. They may be not overdoses, and that's fine. We'll determine that. But if you just do quick numbers, 45, we're in the first quarter of the year's past, right? So what's 45 times 4? That's where we're at, right? 180. And so, but that's just an estimate, right? You never know what's going to happen with that number that'll push us, closer to 300.
And I know we're in the middle of a recording. Do you by any chance have the end of first quarter for 2022?
No, I don't.
For comparison?
Yeah, so 2023, the total was 289.
That was the highest year? Okay.
No, that wasn't the highest year. The highest year was 311.
Okay. So what year was that?
That would have been 22. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But in your experience, are we on track to make a record year?
I think we're on track to have another triple-digit year. But I think it's really too soon to kind of extrapolate that. Certainly, we can say, 45 times 4, roughly. Let's call it 50 times 4, whatever you want to do. That's 200. Then that would be a good year. That would be a downtrend. But it's not to say that sometime during this summer we get a huge quarter, right? Because you can't. It's really unpredictable. Much like, and I know we might even potentially reach the discussion of homicides.
We are,
and so you can extrapolate those numbers, but again, it's not necessarily completely.
I'd have to say it's going to be competitive. It's one thing that we've seen over the 12 years that we've been here is when it gets hot, the homicide rates go up, the overdose rates go up. Right when people are out partying and have time off, right? Those kind of things. When it gets hot, the rates come up. Holidays will pick overdoses up when people are off. So I think we haven't hit the real stride yet this year, I don't believe.
Let's switch so overdoses is obviously one of the big things you guys handle, but homicides this year, you even said this in your news conference last week that unfortunately they're pretty high and they're on pace to set a record year.
Yeah, so we've had 43 homicides to date. So 43 in the first quarter, you could do the math on that and see that, we're approaching, which I think was an all-time year, which is 170 something.
173 in 2021.
Yeah, and so now you're dealing with a year that may look like that. Now, we could be blessed and not have a single homicide the rest of this year, which would be great. But that's just not likely to happen. It's unfortunately, we saw this string of homicides. It almost seemed like there was one a day for a while. Mm-hmm. It was one after the next in the first quarter of the year, which is really kind of interesting because that's not the typical time of year that we see surges. We typically see surges in homicides in the summer months, is when it's hot, August, September, that kind of time frame. So for us as investigators, we've got an atypical time of year with a high number of homicides. What's going to happen when it is the typical time of year, right? And, a lot of this is speculation. I'm not saying that I wish we had some kind of crystal ball we could predict all that. We're really responsive to what happens.
It is based on experience.
But it's based on experience.
I was about to say, but you have 12 years of experience just as in the coroner's office, but then prior to that, law enforcement, you have some experience knowing this. I guess, I don't know if you can answer this. What can be done? It's no secret, crime in Baton Rouge is bad. But even though your number's 43 for the entire parish, a lot of those homicides come down to the city of Baton Rouge. For the listeners, obviously that means that you have the city, but then we don't have counties here, we have parishes. So the coroner's office counts the number in the entire county, if you want to call it that, in our parish. But a lot of those numbers of the 43, majority of it is coming down to just the city limits of Baton Rouge.
So I'm gonna take the first part of this and then let Shane answer the second part. I want everybody to understand there is a unique connection between our overdose and narcotic problem and our homicide problem, right? And so what's remarkable about that statement is if you solve one, you could potentially solve both. And so that's why that becomes very crucial. And you're talking about our two largest areas where we're seeing unnatural death, homicides and overdoses. Wouldn't it be nice to decrease both of those by potentially, being a little bit progressive with how we manage that?
So what can we do?
So, and you and I have had these conversations before, and and I don't know, I'm just I like to apply things in a simple fashion. I've worked in law enforcement, I've worked in narcotics, I've worked homicide, and now I'm here at the coroner's office, right? So those are the perspectives I'm bringing to this. And I call it a kindergarten analogy, right? So if we're a couple of kindergarten teachers and we're sitting there with those kids all morning, everything's fine. They're playing with their blocks, coloring, everybody's getting along. We leave for 2 hours. We're going to come back to somebody's been bit in the face, and there'll be a ball patch pulled out of somebody's head, somebody's writing on the wall, maybe somebody's had an accident on the floor, all the bad things with people who are unsupervised, the kids. Well, so the drug dealers wind up being the ones who are shooting each other. That's the vast majority of this is young men who are not gainfully employed. They're out there selling drugs, and they're not seeing that pressure from what I'll call like technical narcotics enforcement, right? Where there's surveillance is and there's undercover buys, all the things that we did. Now, I'm not saying it's not happening because I know of an agency in East Baton Rouge Parish that is working very, very hard on those type of cases. But that pressure is not happening in the city limits.
No, there's no narcotics division within the Baton Rouge Police Department.
Correct. So the pressure isn't there. And so that pressure leaves them, their only pressure now is from each other through gang affiliations or territory, turf battles, those kind of things. So because they're not feeling that pressure. And of course, a lot of things changed in 2016. The Ferguson effect is a real thing. And law enforcement, those officers that are out there doing this work every day have got to know that if they do a Terry stop on somebody, a stop and frisk, somebody's out on a street corner, the grass is all worn off the yard. It looks like there's been a lot of foot traffic there. And it's a high crime, high drug area. They need to know if they do that stop and they do it within their procedures and the law, that they'll see backup. They'll have backup from their agencies, wherever they are across the country, right? So there needs to be, that's what has to happen. I mean, we're not just locally, but nationally, we are at a time that we're going to have to, law enforcement is going to have to be supported, and they're going to have to be able to and do the job that they were trained to do, or it's going to get bad. It's going to get bad, and people are going to have to start worrying about protecting themselves across the country rather than counting on law enforcement to do that. That we're at a real turning point because they're not going to the profit motive for them continuing to perpetrate violence against each other. At some point, that's got to run out. And then what's next? What's next? Is it going into our neighborhoods and looking for opportunities? So that there has to be some pressure, and I'm going to use globally justice. There has to be pressure from justice on people who have made that decision to be lifetime criminals. East Baton Rouge Parish, we've got to make a decision to make it too expensive for them to do business there and too uncomfortable if we want to change the direction of crime in East Baton Rouge Parish. And it could be through sentencing. It could be just the kind of day-to-day contact. I think the sheriff's office, God, we're probably approaching 30 years. They've had the SCAT team that has done just exactly this for 30 years. They go out and contact people who are standing up in the streets selling drugs and do whatever it takes to dissuade them from doing that anymore. And that's what has to happen across the parish.
And, I mean, it sounds like it's obviously not a simple answer. It's layers or a domino effect almost.
Well, I think what Dr. Clark alluded to, and I want to be clear for all your listeners, is if you apply pressure to the drug dealers, you will see the homicide rate fall. And this isn't a theory, right? You can go right on Dr. Clark's webpage. I broke down homicide numbers all the way back to the very beginning when we started having electronic records, and I was able to pull those stats year by year. As we go along, the years that there was the least number of homicides over the last, since 1994, I think is when I started, is when you had the most officers assigned to a narcotics unit.
So
It's right there.
I guess what I mean by that is when I'm saying a domino effect, we need to restore narcotics at Baton Rouge Police. East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office cannot handle the entire parish.
Well, the choice is you either stand up a robust narcotics enforcement unit at Baton Rouge Police Department, or the sheriff has to make the decision to triple the size of the one he has. DEA could come in and make some, because I was fortunate enough to witness the weed and seed operation back in Gus Young back in the early 90s. It was extraordinarily effective. And the way that was done, it wasn't confrontational with the police. There were a series of buys made over about 90 days. The people were identified, and they issued indictments for them, and they picked them up and removed them from the community. And then there was a reinvestment in Gus Young. That's how the Gus Young Park got built right then. All the new homes right around there. It just completely changed that whole Gus Young area for the better. So it can be done. We've seen it happen here before.
I guess, can we say we need to sound the alarm in Baton Rouge? I mean, there are a lot of people. As a reporter, I hear often, I don't want to go to Baton Rouge. I'll go to Ascension. I'll go to Livingston. I'll even go all the way to Hammond. I'm not going to Baton Rouge. I don't care if it's shorter, because they don't feel safe.
Well, you look at it from sounding the alarm. I mean, you can go to my website. I've got 12 annual reports that sound the alarm every year of what the bad stuff is. So I think it's time to react to that. We have not seen a downturn of anything. We've not seen it got better. It just seems to always get worse. And, unfortunately, there's some impoverished areas of the Baton Rouge that, are become forgotten about. And you could help those people by being aggressive, with the bad guys. This is just about good people and bad people, right? Fortunately, there's probably a lot more good people than there are bad people. That's the good news. But the little bad ones are making it bad for everybody, right? And so deal with them. Deal with the bad people. You don't get to do the things that are bad and misbehave. There are consequences for that. We've learned that, all of us in this room have learned that since we were children, right? And if you want to act like a child, then you get treated like a child. It's a shame. It is a shame.
I want an unfiltered answer. Do you think it's possible to reverse what we're seeing? If not reverse it, at least start the decrease.
I think anything's possible. Absolutely. It takes the right mindset and the people that want to do it, and they just go for it. And you work day and night and you make it happen. I mean, we had a position 12 years ago in this parish where we kind of had an okay coroner's office. You know what I mean? And Shane and I worked day in and day out. I mean, I won the election in November. I didn't take office. Coroners don't take office until the end of March. We spent 6 months studying coroners, Louisiana coroners from around the country. And we said, what is the best thing that we could do? Because that's what we're going to bring. And we did. And we put those processes in place. And we're very proud of it. I think it's something that we've really accomplished to make the office what it is. And so, yeah, it's doable. Just gotta apply it. Look at what's happening in other areas successfully and bring it to Baton Rouge. It's as simple as that. And that just takes the will of the few people that are ready to do it, make the step.
And if there's a will,
yeah,
there's a way.
And I'll look at it as it's all the way down to the voter, right? Anybody who can hear this, if you vote, and you should if you can, is you have to identify candidates that part of their campaign is public safety, is making that community safer, and then you vote for them, and then you hold them to it, right? You don't just say, okay, I voted for you, I expect you to do it, right? So if they don't keep that promise of a safer community for you, then they only have a few years, and it's time for you to get loud again and find somebody that will commit as a voter, right? I think that there's vast billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in property values at stake in East Baton Rouge Parish. The very economy is at stake in East Baton Rouge Parish, right? It has to be a safe place for people to come and live.
And it's the largest parish in the state.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's saying a lot. If that's not sounding the alarm, then I don't know what else is.
So if it's not time to sound the alarm, I'm real interested in what most people would think where that line is, because we've passed it for me, right? But for most people, do you think Baton Rouge has passed the line that a drastic change needs to be made? I think that if you ask most people, And particularly, I mean, we're recording this right outside of East Baton Rouge Parish. And this parish, or this county where we're sitting right now, is full of people who have left Baton Rouge over crime.
Agreed. A lot we're seeing. In fact, we just did a story last week about Livingston Parish seeing a boom, an increase in population, Ascension Parish, Jefferson Parish,
Sure.
but people are moving out of Orleans and East Baton Rouge. Why? Number one reason, crime.
Sure.
I mean, public safety. If you don't feel safe somewhere, you're not going.
Right.
There's economic opportunity here. There's jobs here, but people have to feel safe.
Yep. I guess one of the last questions I want to ask you guys, and I feel like we talk all the time, is how overwhelmed is your office, your people, your staff?
So, as the numbers go up, very overwhelmed. You know, I mean, you look at where we started, and I always kind of go back to that. We had Shane and I and 3 death investigators. We've grown 3 death investigators to 10. That's what we have now. We have a full cadre of sexual assault nurse examiners to manage that jurisdiction, and then a bunch of physicians and mid-levels to manage our mental health jurisdiction. This is not, I mean, being the biggest office requires that. And so, I mean, even from an economic standpoint, you know, I think the first budget that I inherited coming into office was $900,000 a year. That's what we were operating on. The biggest parish was operating on less than $1 million. We operate at about $3.4 million now. And if you ask me if that's enough, probably not. We probably could do with some more investigators on the payroll to just manage the sheer volume of things we're seeing. When it's one thing to investigate a natural death, right? People with known chronic medical illnesses. Those, I hate to use the word simple, but they're not complicated. Then take it all the way to a scenario where you have a homicide with 40 gunshot wounds. One homicide shot 40 times. And think about the amount of energy that goes into that one death. The documentation, the photography, the ancillary testing, x-rays, etc. The pathologist, the time it takes to do a 40 gunshot wound autopsy versus a single gunshot wound autopsy. I mean, it's just tremendous. And then extrapolate that into the detectives, what the cops are doing to solve the issue, the district attorney eventually making it through the judicial process and testimony, and then sometime down the road, there's a court case, right? And then what happens after that? And so that accumulative effect of all those things is what's stressing the system. And that's because of the unnatural deaths.
Shane, walk me through the process. So we have a homicide. There's been a shooting, multiple shots fired, person dies on scene. How does the coroner's office step in now?
Well, in some cases, depending on the size of the scene, for example, if somebody's just, I'll make a scenario up. Somebody's right outside of a convenience store. They were robbed right there, and they were shot once or twice, right? So pretty quickly, my investigators can get over there. Our jurisdiction is the body and the things that are on or about it, right? So we'll go, and if we can get to that person pretty quickly, then they're there 30 minutes to an hour. If it's a very large scene, like some of the ones we've been seeing lately, where a person
blocks apart.
Well, not only that, but that person's body is in the middle of where there's hundreds and hundreds of shell casings. Well, what we don't want to do is contaminate evidence. So we've got to allow the police or the sheriff's deputies to work that scene. So it's kind of a newer phenomenon over the last 4 or 5 years, where when we get a call to a scene, our death investigators will call the detectives and say, "How does your scene look?" And they'll say 3 hours, we'll call you. And so as they get about 30 or 40 minutes out from being able to process the body, they will contact us and we will meet them then. So we're not just sitting out there, because we're still getting calls the whole time. So it's common, unfortunately, very sad, but it's common to see our investigators sitting in our van at a scene, and people wonder, like, why are they in that van so long? Well, they're in that van taking other calls. They have a computer and their cell phones. They're still taking calls, and they're waiting for the scene and those crime scene investigators, for the police to be ready for us.
And let's be honest, in Baton Rouge, we cover it far too often, especially weekends. I think, 2 weekends ago or a weekend ago, we had a rash of homicides. 5, and then I don't even know how many people were injured. 8 injured, 8 shootings. It seems like you guys are running from call to call to call
Yes.
to pick up a body.
Well, yes, because we still have, well, it's not just picking up a body, right? We're still conducting that scene investigation. We're taking our own photos. Then they transport that body back. And what the public doesn't see is we get them back. We've got to catalog any property they had. For example, let's say our investigators get back and they have a cell phone there. Now, the police may be interested in that, so then we'll have to say we found a cell phone. Come back and pick that cell phone up so they can take a look at that phone. But we also have to x-ray that person, right, to give that pathologist some guidance. On my end, administratively, I've got to contact the pathologist and say, okay, I've got a guy shot 40 times. When would you like to start? How long before I can schedule the following autopsy? There's a lot of scheduling stuff that goes in. Then we want to make sure that the police can be there, right? That was one of our commitments coming in. So we wanted to make sure that we have service to law enforcement, and the last thing we want to be is some sort of hindrance to law enforcement. We want to be helpers in their job. So they go through the autopsy. And then by then, very often it's me talking to the family members. Like, this is what's going on. This is a schedule. Your loved one's here. You know, we've got to collect forensic evidence, and I'll reach back out to you when we're done. So y'all start thinking about a funeral home. And there's, of course, families, they want to know information. So very often I have meetings with families. We'll show them photos. The law allows them to see that. So eventually we do release that decedent to a funeral home of the family's choice.
And
just to be clear, that's one case.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's one case.
Exactly. So imagine
just add
a violent weekend, and that's why I started with the question. You have your own morgue there.
Right.
How many bodies can you keep?
So we have three coolers in our morgue. Actually, the third one we put in when we got to the office. And so our capacity, if we do things a little constructively, we could probably fit 40 to 45 bodies at one time. Fortunately, we've never had that level or need. We were worried during COVID that was a potential. We were worried so much during COVID that we actually had an external refrigerated unit brought on the property. I think
we didn't have to use.
We didn't have to use. I think the most we've had at one time was about 30 bodies. And so to put that in perspective to your listeners, you know, the largest plane that can land at BTR at the airport in Baton Rouge is 183 passengers. So even that would inundate us, and we're the biggest show around in the Baton Rouge area. I don't know if we're the biggest in the state of Louisiana. I think Jefferson might outpace us recently for cooler storage space because they're building a new section to their facility. But nonetheless, I mean, even the big hospital systems that exist in East Baton Rouge Parish, have 6-7 spots in their morgue.
Now, does East Baton Rouge Parish, your office, the coroner's office, do you guys provide autopsies for neighboring parishes?
So we used to provide autopsy services for neighboring parishes. We would use that as a form of self-generated income for the office to supplement the tax burden to run the office. And unfortunately, there became a point several years ago where the volume of work required just for our parish, which is our jurisdiction, was so overwhelming that we had to stop the program. And so we no longer do that system anymore. We'd like to. I mean, certainly you want to help your neighbor out, especially if you have the assets. You can charge them. They would pay us, which goes right into the operational fund of the office. But we just, our first obligation is to East Baton Rouge Parish, and so that's why we made that decision.
And how long ago did you have to stop that?
That's 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I think.
So that's saying a lot. Yeah. The volume of people coming through for just East Baton Rouge Parish, you can't even keep up with that.
Yeah. So we are working and putting all our energy and effort into our jurisdiction, which is East Baton Rouge Parish, and that's the volume we can manage. We really, and some of these parishes that we did have on contract to do this service for, they're minimal numbers. I mean, 2, 3, 4 a year kind of thing. It was not a huge number, but even those little bitty numbers from multiple parishes add up and could overwhelm what our main responsibility is, which is East Baton Rouge Parish.
Wow. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add to make sure our listeners know?
Well, this year I've been doing so. First of all, any statistical information or just information in general about the office can be found on our website, ebrcorner.com. There's a news section that's updated pretty regularly for statistics and numbers. I have 12 years worth of annual reports on there. So if there's ever an interest in looking about where we came and where we are, what the parish looks like from the jurisdictions of the corner, you can find it there. This year, we did a little bit different presentation of our annual report. I know you covered that. But I would like to point it out if somebody didn't see it, is certainly everything we talk about that we do as the corner oftentimes seems very depressing. We're talking about people that have died, oftentimes tragically. People having mental health crisis, people have been sexually assaulted. So we understand that the things that come through our front door are bad things. That's why someone's at the coroner's office. Something bad has happened. We're there to respond, provide compassion. But this year, we took a little bit different spin on what we do, and we really highlighted a part of our job which has to do with turning death into life, and that has to do with our relationship with with LOPA, Louisiana Organ Procurement Agency, where we allow people and make the connection between people who have lost loved ones and the ability to turn that into an organ or tissue donation and give life to someone else. And it's been a pretty profound impact. LOPA ran our numbers. My office, we're the number one person in the state of Louisiana that has made this relationship work as far as the number of cases. 650 families have benefited, over 1,000 donor families. And so we're real proud of that because, for us, it's taking something that's potentially really bad and converting it into something that's good.
And when you go to the DMV, it's a simple heart on your license. That way you guys know, or investigators know, that this person chose to be an organ donor when they pass, and you have no idea how many lives you could save.
Yeah,
I've
it's
covered
amazing.
Far too many stories of somebody surviving all because they were given the gift of donation. Yep. So,
and as we're recording this, I was on the way over here on the drive, and we got a call from LOPA. And this morning, our office approved a person who was an unfortunate victim of a gunshot wound the last couple days. His family has made the decision to honor his wishes, and he's donating heart, kidneys, and other things right now as we're talking. Yeah,
wow,
it's happening right now.
Okay. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, guys, I thank both of y'all for coming on and talking and just breaking all this down. Even me being in media for so many years, I think I also have learned a few things, but also just puts in perspective what the truth is in East Baton Rouge Parish and some of the ongoings and maybe things we need to kind of keep tabs on.
Well, it'd be nice to come back on your podcast in the future and talk about how it's better.
Improving. Yes, You're right. You're right. We'll hold you to that. Dr. Beau Clark, Shane Evans, we thank you guys for joining us. Thank you to our listeners. As always, we appreciate you, and we will see you on the next episode of Louisiana Unfiltered.